All right, you can go ahead and turn to Leviticus chapter 19. Leviticus chapter 19. So to kind of give you an idea of what the next several weeks is going to look like for us, today we're going to have a conversation about stewardship, talking about our time, our talents, our treasure, our temple, and our testimony as the 5 T's of stewardship, and we'll walk through that here in a second. And then starting next week, we're actually going to start walking through the Old Testament. We're going to start in the book of Genesis. And we're going to just kind of walk through fairly slowly through the Old Testament and see what it is that God was doing in there and what we can learn from those stories, okay? So I'm excited about that. It'll be the first time for me to slowly walk through the Old Testament in a sermon series. So I'm looking forward to that. Today for stewardship, when I talk about stewardship, a lot of people, their first mindset goes to money. And the first thing people think about is tithing. Well, when I talk about stewardship, I like us to have a full picture of what being a good steward for the Lord is. There are 5 T's of stewardship, and they are time, talents, treasure, temple, and testimony. These are the 5 T's of stewardship. The time is what I was sitting here talking about the kids with. How do we spend the 24 hours that we have every single day? Is it get up, go to work, pick up the kids from school, make dinner, do chores around the house, go to bed, and then that's kind of how we spend our day? Is it going out doing fun things, things we enjoy, or do we spend every single day giving time to the Lord? 24 hours is quite a bit of time. And a lot of times, if we're honest with ourselves, we'll go through a full day and we won't have spent any time with the Lord. That's not being a good steward of the time that we've been given. Talents. Each and every single one of us have been given talents by the Lord, whatever that may be. Maybe it's in athletics, maybe it's in music, maybe it's in art, whatever the case may be. Maybe it's in organization. Maybe you're a very organized person. And those talents that we're being given, a lot of times we use them for our own personal enjoyment. I enjoy sports, so I like to go play disc golf. I like to go play basketball. I like to go do these things because it's something that I enjoy. But these talents that God has given us, they're to be used for God's glory, for His glory, not for our own satisfaction. Do we use our talents to glorify God? The third one is treasure, or our finances, or the things that God has given us. Do we use those things for God, or do we use it for personal self? Temple is your body. Okay? How do we go about treating our body, this temple that God has given us? All right, do we take care of it like we should? If we don't take care of our body like we should, that's not being a good steward of this body that God has given us. And the last one is testimony. This is a big one in my opinion. Every single one of us that are Christians, God has rescued you from something. Or whatever your sin issues that you have, God has rescued you from that, and He has saved you. And you have a story that needs to be shared with other people. We live in a very secretive society, maybe not be the right word, but a very closed down, personal, I'm going to keep the things that go on in my life to myself kind of culture. If there's something wrong going on in my life, in our culture, it's you don't tell anybody, you don't like people to see the things going on. We show up to church, and you've probably heard it, we kind of put the mask on, and we show up to church, and we like to act like everything's going well, everything's good, but in reality, everything at home, maybe it's a mess, right? I like to put that mask on. But if you're in Christ, God has rescued you from something, and you have a testimony of the ways that God has worked in your life. And to keep that to yourself is not being a good steward of the testimony that God has given you. That story that God has given you could be used to help somebody else, to point them towards Christ. But so often in our culture, we're so private about these things that it's not being shared with other people. And so those are the 5 T's of stewardship. And this is what we're going to kind of look at today. Since the beginning of creation, I believe God has been teaching us about being good stewards. If you think even all the way back in Genesis, you think of Adam and Eve. They're put in the garden, and Adam was called to be a steward of all of creation. He names all the animals. He's supposed to take care of them. He's supposed to take care of the garden. God gave him something to be a steward over. And since the beginning, God has been teaching us about that. Now, for the most part of our conversation today, we're going to be thinking about Israel. So I want to remind us of Israel's story a little bit. Israel, at one point in their life, they get enslaved in Egypt. You've grown up in church, you know the story. I won't spend too much time on it. They get enslaved in Egypt, and as they're enslaved in Egypt, they have no control over their time, their money, their talents, their temple, their testimony. They have no control over anything. They're enslaved. They work sun up to sundown every day, and they were brick makers for Egypt. And it was a very harsh life. They had absolutely no control over anything that they did. And this goes on for 400-something years, that this is where they're at. And then eventually God raises up Moses. And Moses comes in and God frees the Israelites. And for the first time in over 400 years, they have some control over their time and over the things that God has given them. They are now the ones who has control over their time, their talents, their treasure, their temple, and their testimony. They have control over it for the very first time. Now, the problem with that is that can be abused a little bit. And we're going to look at what God tells them in Leviticus here in a minute. But I want you to stop for a second. I want you to think about the first time that you got out on your own. Whether that was 18, you graduated high school, you left your parents' house, and now you went off to college, or maybe you went and got a job and you moved into your own place. I want you to think about the freedom that you felt in that moment. I remember when my parents graduated in 2014 from high school, and we took off in the fall of 2014 and went off to Arkansas Tech for college. And I remember my parents driving me there. I had a little apartment on campus. We got myself moved in, and we got everything organized. My mom, being who she is, she organized everything. She went and got me groceries. Everything was good to go. And then they left, and I was on my own for the first time. And I remember that feeling, thinking, I can do whatever I want right now. I don't have to ask anyone permission for anything. If I want to go out to eat, I'm going to go out to eat, okay? That's what I'm going to do. If I want to go play basketball, go find somewhere to go play some ball right now, that's what I'm going to do. I'm on my own for the first time. And there was a freedom there that I hadn't felt prior to that. And maybe you can remember that time in your life. Well, the problem with that is there are pitfalls that come with that. I wanted to go out to eat. I could go out to eat as much as I wanted to. And then all of a sudden you realize how expensive going out to eat is. And then you're like, okay, maybe this is why my parents didn't want me going out to eat all the time. I remember in college all the time, and I'm going to get on a little bit maybe of a soapbox here or a rant a little bit, but you had freedom. You could go out to eat whenever you wanted to. You could stay up all night however you want to. And the thing that when you're in college is you don't have a lot of money. And people consistently would complain about, I'm broke, I can't ever go do anything. The thing about that was, though, is every day they'd go to Starbucks and spend like $8 on coffee or something like that, right? And so every day there's all this money going to Starbucks every day, but yet we're so broke. Well, you wouldn't be. Maybe we were a little bit of better stewards of our money, right? And I've been there. Everybody loved Seven Brew a couple weeks ago when everything was free, right? That was a great time for everybody. Seven Brew was giving out free drinks. Everybody, businesses, they were getting free drinks. Cars were wrapped around the building getting free drinks at Seven Brew. Until you came back and you had to spend $10 for that same drink that you were getting free earlier. Now they got you hooked though, right? You keep going back. They have this whole point system that Lauren loves. You go and you get like 10 drinks and you get the 11th one free, or you get so many points and it's a free drink. You just spent $100 to get to the free drink, but it's free, right? And the only reason I have that in my sermon is because I'm hoping my wife is listening over there and she hears this. It's this freedom that, hey, I can go, I'm out on my own. I can go get a drink if I want to. I'm off at college for the very first time. I have no rules that I have to follow. And so these college kids, every day they're getting drinks at Starbucks and they're losing all their money. I'm 29 and my wife's losing all my money getting that Seven Brew. We first start out No one can dictate to us what we do with our time, our talents, our treasure, our temple, our testimony. And that is where Israel found themselves as they left Egypt. As they leave Egypt after 400 years of slavery, having no control of anything, now they have all the control they want. They have all of the freedom that they want. But there's danger in that. So in Leviticus chapter 19, starting in verse 9, I want us to see God teach them a little bit about stewardship and how in being a good steward of the things that God has given us, we can make such an impact on the people around us. Leviticus 19, starting in verse 9. It says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. And you shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather every grape of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. Many times in Egypt, they leave Egypt and they become farmers. They get into the promised land and they have all of this land that they become farmers. And remember, they've never had control over what they did in their life up to this point. And so they would have their harvest season where they would go out and they would harvest their wheat. And a lot of times their harvest season would kind of maybe a little bit overlap, or it would be back to back with the vineyard harvest, okay, when they would go, when they would get their wine and everything. So that time of year was a very joyous time of year. You've done all of this work, you put into your fields and your vineyard, you put it all in, and now you're getting to reap that harvest. Think of it like payday, right? You've worked all week, maybe you get paid every week, every 2 weeks, whatever you get, and it's payday now, and there's an enjoyment about that. You see the money hit the account, and you start to think, what am I going to do with this? I've got this set aside for the bills, maybe when we want to go out to eat, maybe when we want to plan a trip, whatever the case may be. It's payday, and now I have my money. What am I going to do with it? Well, it's a joyous time. They've gotten their harvest. They've got their vineyard. What are we going to do with it now, right? God commands them in these verses, as we saw in verse 9 and 10. He says, you see this field. You have this field that you've just had all of this great harvest come up, right? And you want to go out there and you want to gather your harvest. Well, it says, you see your field, that little corner over there, I don't want you to touch it. You're going to harvest all of the rest of that field, but that corner right over there, don't touch it. You leave it. And then he says, the gleanings. I don't want you to touch the gleanings either. Now, a gleaning, if you don't know what a gleaning is, it's the stuff left over after the harvest. So they have their grain that comes up. They go and they plow a lot of it down. They bring the ox and the threshing floor and they plow all the grain down. They separate the grain from the stalk. And then they start to go and they start to bundle it up. Well, in all of that bundling that you do, there's going to be some left behind. This week, Friday, it was, I think, I got up and I mowed my yard. Well, my yard, after I mow, there's just grass clippings everywhere, okay? So I go and I blow them into a pile and I rake them up. But I can be out there all day and there's still going to be some grass clippings left over. I can't get every single bit of it up. Well, think of that same way in their harvest. Yeah, they've collected a lot of their grain at this point, but there's still some left over that didn't get put into the bundles. So he says, hey, the corner of the field out there, you leave it, and that leftover stuff, don't touch it. I want you to leave it there. And he said in verse 10 that the reason why he wanted them to leave it was for the poor and for the stranger. What would happen is as people came in, whether it was foreigners traveling through town or whether it was poor in their community, they would come through and they would need some food. Well, as you're coming across the field, all the food's gone except that little corner over there. And that little corner was left so that they could come through and they could pick some of the grain off the stalk and they could eat it and they could sustain themselves. They would find all the leftovers on the ground and they could pick it up and they could eat it. And it took care of the foreigner and it took care of the stranger. And one of the things that really caught my eye on this was in the aspect of what he was teaching them about being a good steward, is that when we are a good steward of our time, our talents, our treasure, our temple, and our testimony, it impacts the people around us. They could have harvested all of their crops. They could have went and gathered all of the leftovers over. Remember, it's the first time in their lives they've had even a harvest to go collect. They've been in slavery. And they could have gathered it all up for themselves. And then the poor and the strangers would have came by and they would have had nothing to take care of themselves. How you are a steward of these things impacts the people around you. I want to talk about for a minute time, when it comes to time with that. I'm 29 years old. I have 2 kids. I'm a grown man. I could do what I want, right? I can make my own decisions. I don't have to have someone sitting over me telling me what to do, when to do it. I can get off work, and if I want, go grab my disc golf and go out to the course. I can go play basketball all I want to. I can do whatever I want with my time. But that negatively impacts my family when I'm always doing what I want to do and not what my family needs. It negatively impacts them when I spend all of my time focused on what I want to do. See, your time matters. It matters to your family, but it also matters to the people around you at your work. Maybe you have your job and you have your list of responsibilities and you get your responsibilities done. But maybe you have a coworker that needs a little bit of help on something. And maybe you feel like, well, I got my responsibilities done, so I'm going to spend the time that I have left how I want to. But your coworker needs some help. Be a good steward of your time so that you can help them. This impacts the people around you. Same goes with your talents. Let's say you're very talented in some way. I'm going to use the example of music. We always need more people to come up and help sing and play instruments. Maybe you're talented musically. You can sing, you can play an instrument. But maybe you've still just been kind of sitting out in the pews for maybe years. You've got this talent, you've got this ability, but you're not using it within the life of the church. God gave you that talent to use it for his sake. If you can sing, you need to talk to Danny and Beth, and they'll get you up here. What are those talents, and how are you going to use them? Because someone may come up here and hear you singing, and it may lead them to start praising the Lord. It may lead them to ask, I wonder what this is about Christ, because I see that person pouring out their heart in song to the Lord. It impacts the people around us. So how are we being stewards of these things? Do we think of our possessions, our time, our talents, our temple, and our testimony as it's mine to do with what I want? Or do we think it as God has given me these things to impact the people around me? Your temple. Maybe you don't like to take care of your body very well. Well, eventually that body's going to give out, and depending on how we take care of it may impact the timeline on when it gives out. Do we think about our family in those moments? I am a terrible, terrible, terrible eater. I like to eat very little things. I am very picky, and I like to eat a lot of things that are probably not good for me, a lot of fried food. But as I get older, I think of, I've got 2 kids. Do I think about every time I go take a bite, how that might impact my kids if I continue to eat as poorly as I do? These things impact the people around us. Now, in this context of Leviticus 19, though, I think there's 2 specific things that God is trying to show Israel in this moment that I think we can learn from. The first thing that this does in being a good steward of these things that God has given us is it shows God's mercy to other people. For them, it's foreigners who are coming into their land that aren't from Israel. For us, it would be non-believers. When we are good stewards of the things that God has given us, it shows God's mercy to the people around us. There's an example of this in the Old Testament, and it's in the book of Ruth. If you don't know the story of Ruth, Ruth was married to a man, and her mother-in-law's name is Naomi. Now, Naomi had her husband and 2 sons, and both the sons were now married. Well, the husband and the 2 sons all died. So now you have Naomi and you have 2 daughter-in-laws. One daughter-in-law goes back to her hometown, goes back to her family to live with them. Ruth makes the decision to stay with Naomi and to follow her back to Israel. So they follow back, and they go back to Israel. They go back to Naomi's homeland. Now, the problem that they have here is that in their culture, For a woman, a widow, it was a very dangerous place to be in, to not have a man or a husband to help take care of you. Women didn't work. Women didn't work like they have in our culture. So you were reliant. The woman took care of the things at home, and the man went and provided a living for them. So now that the husband is gone, she's got no way to really provide for herself. So in Ruth chapter 2, verse 1, Ruth comes up with a plan. It says, there was a relative of Naomi's husband, a man of great wealth of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. So Ruth, the Moabites, said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain after him in whose sight I might find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So here's Ruth's plan. One, Ruth is now, she's poor. She's struggling. She doesn't have a way to provide for her Naomi. And she's a foreigner. But in Leviticus 19, God called Israel to leave a section of their field unharvested and to leave the gleanings on the ground. For who? For the foreigner and for the poor. So Ruth goes out and she's starting to go out to fields. And she sees the corner and she sees the gleanings. And she's going out after they harvest and she's gathering up the leftovers so that her and Naomi may eat. That wouldn't have happened if it wasn't what happened in Leviticus 19, where God had commanded them to be good stewards of these things that he had given them. And because of this, all these years later, Boaz is being faithful. He's leaving a corner of his field. He's leaving the gleanings. And Naomi and Ruth have food to eat because of this. Because Boaz is being a faithful steward of what God has given him. We go on in chapter 2, we jump down to verse 8, and Boaz takes it a step further. We see in verse 8, then Boaz said to Ruth, you will listen, my daughter, will you not? Do not go glean in another field, nor go from here, but stay close by my young women. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Have I not commanded the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. So she fell on her face, bowed down to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? He takes it a step further. He says, hey, I don't want you going to these other fields and gleaning their leftovers. No, you just stay in my field. And when they go out to reap the harvest, go with them. When the young men draw water, you can drink their water. I've told all the men not to touch you. And he takes it a step further, and his field, the things that he has produced, the things he has worked so hard for, he is using to take care of Ruth and Naomi. Out of this story, I don't know if you know, Ruth her and Boaz end up getting married over time, and she ends up becoming the great-grandmother of King David. King David, who goes on to do all the things that he did for Israel. The great king. None of that would have been possible if it wasn't for this story. If it wasn't for what was going on right here with Boaz being a good steward of what God had given him. It impacts generations. It impacts us today. Today, all the things that we learn about King David and him being a man after God's own heart, and all the stories that we learn so much from, can be traced back to this moment where Boaz is being a faithful steward of the things that God has given him. I want you to take a minute, and I want you to think back when you were a kid. And I want you to think back of all the adults who spent so much time investing in you in Sunday school or children's church or whatever the case may be, youth group. They spent a lot of time and energy, and they spent all of these that we can talk about. They spent their time, their talents, their treasure, their temple, and their testimony investing in you. And it is still impacting you to this day. Because they were being good stewards of what God had given them. Are we now being good stewards of the things that God has given us? We can always find reasons not to. Boaz had plenty of reasons not to help Ruth. Plenty of them. This was his field. He was the one who had done the work. He left his corner. He even left the gleanings. He could have left it at that and let Ruth keep bouncing from field to field, trying to do everything she could to survive. But he took it a step further, and he took care of her. And now the whole world's been impacted because of it. Do we view ourselves in that light of being a steward in that way like Boaz is? Do I understand that, you know what, I could come up with a lot of excuses. I don't have time. I don't have the energy. I have this stuff going on with my kids. I can't come do these things. Or I can be like Boaz, and even though I have all the excuses I can make, I ignore the excuses, and I be a good steward of what he's given me. The second thing that this taught Israel, it taught them God's mercy to foreigners. It taught them that God is merciful to people. And he used Boaz to show that mercy to Ruth. But it also taught Israel to trust the Lord. Remember, they've been in slavery for 400-something years. They come out. They have their first bit of freedom. They have their own fields. They have their own stuff that God has provided for them. God is the one who rescued them from Egypt. He's the one that sent the plagues. He's the one that's led them through the wilderness into the promised land. He has consistently provided. And now they have this great field because of God's provision. He says, hey, that corner, don't touch it. Those leftovers, don't touch it. The way that I heard one pastor talk about this one time is he said, it taught them that God can do more with their 90% than they can do with their 100. That's what God was teaching them in this moment. All these things that God had provided, these great blessings, these fields, these vineyards, these great blessings to them, they were supposed to leave a section of it alone and trust that with the 90% of that field that God was going to take care of it. They had bills to pay. They had things that they needed to do. They could have just taken that crop, that grain, they could have taken all that stuff from the vineyard to make their wine, and they could have sold it, and they could have set up themselves in a great life maybe. But that's not what God called them to do. And at times in our lives, and I've been there, I've been at times in my life where I look at my budget on paper, and I think it just doesn't look like it's going to work all the time. And if at any point you start out on your own, you start having kids, you've probably been there. Where you've gotten to a point where kids are getting expensive, things are getting expensive, everything, insurance is expensive, all these different things. And you just look at your budget and sometimes you're like, I just don't know how we're going to figure it out. And the temptation in that moment, always, even for me, the temptation is of the flesh is, well, I'm still giving that tithe money. Maybe we could use that. The temptation is always there. But God teaches us he can do more with our 90% than we can our 100. And that's true of our finances, and that's true of our time. You have a lot of things that you can do throughout the day, a lot of responsibilities. You get up, maybe you have kids in the house. If you're like me, you got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. They don't get up and get dressed on their own. Right? You got to get up, you got to get them dressed, you got to get them fed. All right, this morning, it's 8:15. I try to get here by 8:30 on Sundays, and my daughter is still sitting there trying to eat her breakfast, and she's not dressed because she's been watching TV instead of eating, right? So we got to rush her along, say, you got to get this going. We still got to do hair, we got to get dressed, we got to brush teeth, we got to do all these things. And then we get here, and then you go, maybe for you, it's you get your kids to daycare, you get them to school, and now you got 8 hours of work. Now I've got to work for 8 hours. Now I get off work, I got to go pick the kids up. I got to go get them fed. I got to get them taken care of. And then I've got to get them ready for bed. And then I got to get myself ready to bed. And then I got to do it all over again the next day. Where's my time for my quiet time in that? Where's my time to serve in the life of the church in that? There's a lot of things to do. And everything that I just mentioned, you have to do. Have to do it. I guess I could bring my daughter up here in her PJs with her teeth not brushed and stuff, but y'all would probably look at me a little funny, and it wouldn't be a very good dad if I did that. I've got to do those things. But at some point, when do I start putting my time to the Lord? And trust him that I spend my time for the Lord, and I trust that he'll take care of all the rest of the stuff. He'll help me find time to get the rest of the things taken care of. At some point, I've got to trust him with that. It's my talents. Maybe I'm talented in some way. I'm talented in music. I'm talented in art. But for some reason, I'm holding that back from the life of the church or from using it to glorify God. At what point am I going to trust him with that? My testimony. Again, I think this is a big one. At camp, we had, I think it was junior week. Seth was sitting with all the counselors up on the porch, and he was talking with them about the week, the things that were going to go on, and how can we talk with the kids about things. And I think it was actually the last day even, maybe. And I told them one of the things that I encouraged them to do is in their small group to share their story with the kids. Now, it's junior week, so some of the kids may not super relate to some of the stories. But I told them to share their story with the kids of how the Lord has worked in their life to draw them close to the Lord, whether it be church, whether it be at camp, whatever the place may be. How has God worked in your life? Share that with the kids, because we don't know where the kids all are, and we don't know how that story may impact them in some way. But to do that, sometimes we have to talk about the bad things. We have to talk about the mistakes that we've made. I've sat down with so many people throughout the years, and I've counseled and I've talked with people about different situations in their life and struggles that they've had in life. And one of the things I like to tell them towards the end of that counseling session is at some point, you got to let God use this for other people's life. The temptation is to keep it to ourselves, to not talk about the bad things and the struggles that we've had. But there's someone else around you that needs to hear that story and needs to know how God can rescue them from that thing. But when you keep it to yourself all the time, it doesn't get used. It doesn't impact other people. You think of the bad things that David did. David did some bad things. He repented, and you need to repent. But David did some bad things, but it's a story that's used for God's glory. Solomon did some bad things, but it's a story that's used for God's glory. If God has rescued you from something, you need to share that with people, and you need to use it. If we're not being a good steward of that story. I read this verse earlier to 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19 to the kids, but we'll read it again. Command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in certain riches, but in the living God who gives us richly all things to enjoy. Let them do good, that they may be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share, storing up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. The question in all this really shouldn't be for us, will God provide? The question for us in all of this is, do we believe him? Do we trust that these things that he's given us, he will use for his glory? I have a couple examples of this. One, I guess I'm going to do a little promoting even. We 2 weeks from now have VBS. And VBS takes a lot of work to put on. Camp is one of our big things that we do in the summer, and VBS is the other. And it takes a lot of work. And maybe you've been hesitant to come serve in some way. This week, this whole room, the little chapel and across the street, all has to be decorated, okay? If you go look in this room right now, there are decorations up to the ceiling in here, ready to be come and thrown out in this sanctuary after this week. I know tomorrow we're working like 8 to 4, and Tuesday there's some times as well. We need people who will come help. And you may say there's reasons why you can't do it, and maybe some of them are legitimate. But at the same time, God has given us time to come and serve. We were up here last Tuesday, and I was up here, my wife was up here, our 2 kids were up here. There was about 7 kids running around just having fun while all of us were decorating. It can be done. The question is, do we want to do it? And the other one that I just lost it, Seth. What was it? I had another example. It's going to come back to me the second I finish here. And then I'll be like, man, I lost it. Whatever the case may be. We have time, we have talents, we have treasure, we have testimony, we have a temple. We have all of these things that God has given us that can be used to help people. It came back to me. One of the biggest examples of this to me even, I'm going to brag on him. He's not even here though. My first year I came to camp. And camp, your first year, you're really, as camp director, you're just trying to figure some stuff out. And I get there, and I had some people who were coming as counselors, and I didn't really know everybody who was coming to be a counselor. It was my first year here. I was kind of trusting some of the other board members and stuff on who could be counselors and stuff. And I don't remember if I really knew Joe Hirschberger at that time. But I remember showing up to camp, and it was junior week. And Joe Hirschberger walks up, and he's going to be a counselor. Joe Hirschberger is 80-something years old at this point. And I'm looking at him, and I'm like, you're here to be a junior week counselor? You're going to stay in these cabins with these kids? You're going to be at all the events and do all this? And he did it. And I was sitting there thinking, if anyone had an excuse not to be here right now, it's Joe Hirschberger, right? But he was there. I mean, he's 80-something years old. Maybe he was his late 70s. And he's at camp for a whole week serving as a counselor. The hardest position probably at camp is counselor. And he's there. And he's serving. He had all the excuses in the world. But he did it because he loved the Lord, because he trusted the Lord. That he was going to go out there and he was going to invest in those kids. And many of you can probably think of maybe a counselor or someone in your life growing up that did that for you. They had all the excuses in the world not to be there. They could have come up with them not to show up, and they showed up anyways for you. And it impacted the rest of your life. As the worship team comes up and we look to close, I challenge us this week to think about these things and think about, am I being a good steward of the things that God has given me? I even think of myself, I'm in ministry, I'm a pastor, and I work throughout the week on the things going on here at the church. But I even myself sometimes question, do I always work on the right things? Am I always a great steward of the things God has given me in ministry? And so this is a challenge for myself as well. It's very easy, even in a pastor's life, to find different things in ministry to do that maybe aren't even the best things that you could be doing. Spending a lot of time maybe in my office researching stuff instead of maybe out in the community serving people, type of thing. God has been gracious to us. He has blessed all of us in a lot of different ways. And I just encourage us, are we being a good steward of those things? Again, the 5 T's of stewardship: time, talents, treasure, temple, and testimony. Do we use those for God's glory? If the answer is no, then I encourage all of us to take a time and self-reflect on that. And find ways to get involved. And find ways to use our treasure for His glory. Find ways to use our testimony for His glory. Because He's deserving of it. And I promise you, He will do more with your 90% than you will do with your 100. Just trust Him in that. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I come before you right now, very, very thankful for you and thankful for all it is that you have done for us. Lord, when we look at this idea of being a steward, sometimes it's hard for us to find ways and carve out time to spend with you, to spend time serving, to use our testimony, because maybe there's parts of our testimony that we're not proud of. Whatever the case may be, it's hard for us at times to use those because we allow the flesh to get in the way. Lord, throughout the gospel, throughout the story of the Bible, though, you've been teaching us about being a good steward. Even going all the way back to the book of Leviticus or back to Genesis with Adam. You've taught us that these things that you have given us are to be used for you and not for ourselves. Lord, show us in what ways we need to do some self-reflection and we need to become good stewards. Lord, all the things that you have given us should be used to glorify your name. Even the things that we're doing this morning, the music, the preaching, the Sunday school classes, the children's stuff, all of it's to glorify you. It's not to glorify us. So Lord, use it in that way and help us to be the good stewards that you've called us to be. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Will you please stand?